you stand before the chamber of failure, right?
Right.
Okay. You go up to try and open it, and it won't open.
What?
I know. But you notice to the right a scale jutting out of the wall.
Right.
And there's some ancient language across it, but you can decipher it because, from the last mission you picked up the glasses of interpretation.
Yes.
It basically says that you have to provide a very minute amount of ejaculate to open the door.
Okay,
But because you're a rogue elf who are infamous for providing large quantities of ejaculate, you can't do it. So you have to do a magic spell to reduce your testicles to that of a gnome, and therefore you'll have enough ejaculate to...
Okay.
So roll for that.
Right.
Goes off on an 18.
18,
Goes off on an 18. Yeah.
That's good.
So you've now got small balls.
Right, okay, perfect.
Right, okay.
Well, that was ideal.
With
the interpretive glasses. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, exactly.
Great.
It all works in tandem, yeah.
Amazing.
So now you roll again to see if you successfully pleasure thyself.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Ooh, 13. What's
13. Well, you've not been able to.
I've not.
No,
why not?
You're trapped. You're just trapped there now. You're going to die.
Has someone come in, come home early or something?
Yeah, and your balls are small forever. So, Cinebois to Cinemen, episode 12. 12. Hope you're well, wherever you are, whatever you're doing. This week, Dungeons and Dragons.
Indeed.
What's the add-on bit? I've forgotten.
Honor Amongst Thieves.
That's it. Honor Amongst Thieves. Thieves.
Yes.
Honor Amongst Thieves. Fucking hell.
We'll be talking about themes though.
We will. Yeah. We're on a tight ship here.
Yeah. Oh, wait a minute. Oh no, sorry, we're not doing that anymore.
No, in fact, we're just cancelling it now.
Yeah.
We always make some variation of that joke every intro. So Dungeons and Dragons, as it's of course a fantasy film, we will be having a good old chinwag about the fantasy genre.
Indeed.
And also about the revival of nerd culture.
Yes.
And its positives and potential not potential, and definite negatives.
Yeah.
And then, of course, a discussion around the film itself. We were saying, actually, when we came out of the cinema, that we're not sure how much we can really say because, we don't want to give too much away, but it's hard to really have a lot of thoughts about it, isn't it, really?
Oh, yeah, big time. I've allowed it to gestate, and I haven't really taken a lot more from it. And that's not by no means like a negative thing at all.
Not at all.
But yeah, it'll be quite a short review at the end, I feel. But that's fine.
Yeah,
that's all
good.
Is,
yeah. Could do a shortening it, can't we? Anyway,
It's
getting to the point now. You can't go for a walk for an hour and 50 minutes. Can you on your own? So
unless you get lost.
Indeed, yeah. Or you've been kicked out of your house.
Maybe.
Yeah. So right, shall we get into it?
Yes.
Righto.
Questing the cinematic void.
Okay then, so the fantasy genre.
Indeed.
Indeed.
Good start.
So let's have a stab at trying to unpack its popularity.
Yeah.
As we always try to here at Cinebois to Cinemen, tackle lofty subjects with very little research or guile.
Yeah.
I would sort of say that at face value, and I know there are plenty of fantasy films and other forms of media that would go against this, but primarily I think a lot of the success of fantasy, at least initially, is escapism.
Oh yeah, absolutely, 100%.
It's perhaps the kind of escapism that can envelop you the most.
Yeah, it's overtly another world, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's the whole thing. That's not to say that if you love fantasy, it doesn't mean the real world doesn't appeal to you at all. But other forms of media and other genres of films, off the top of my head, like I don't know, a film like The Big Short or High Life.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know, something like that. It wouldn't have that same kind of otherworldly appeal that your Lord of the Rings and your sort of labyrinths and otherworldly sort of realm that you can sweep yourself away to for 2.5 hours. Or I kind of think it all does sort of start with Tolkien, although I'm not sure what his influences were. But,
well, I think with Tolkien, I used to be a huge. I'm not as much as I used to be, but I used to be a huge Lord of the Rings fan, especially when I was a teenager.
Yeah.
Obviously, we were brought up in that era when they were coming out. Although, funnily enough, they came out quite early on into my secondary school life. I think Return of the King's like 2013? No, 2003, sorry.
Yeah, 2001, 2 and 3.
Yeah, so it's funny that I always think it's happened when I was older. Anyway. But I think he was very much influenced by folklore, myth and folklore.
Of course, yeah.
Which I think underpins a lot of sort of the most classic or archetypal examples of fantasy.
Yeah.
Myth, folklore, theology.
You got the elves and sort of fairies and
Yeah.
certainly, and then obviously you have things like sort of the Irish folklore, like banshees and that kind of different types of ghosts, will-o'-the-wisps and stuff like that. And yeah, that's probably the.
I think that would be it. I mean, I'm sure there are other examples, but I guess like folklore is fantasy.
Yeah, effectively.
In many ways. I mean, it's probably a more affecting version of fantasy because obviously, as we discussed in the previous episode, there we go. We're already doing it.
Yeah.
We're already calling back to ourselves again. But the idea that mythology and folklore is embedded deeply in our sort of collective consciousness, and particularly way back when we didn't necessarily have the ways in which to try and understand or decipher our environment.
Yeah.
And I guess that is their version of fantasy, would be their version of fantasy. And now, obviously, people like Tolkien mined that deep cavern of mythology.
Royalty-free as well.
Royalty-free, yeah.
As did Disney.
Yes, yeah. And, use that as sort of almost the foundation for his own stab at a mythology that is completely made up.
Unrivaled as well.
Yeah,
in terms of world building, he did it he hit the mark so beautifully first time round. And pretty much every other kind of fantasy writer or I guess fantasy storyteller in general has always got to stand in his shadow.
Did C.S. Lewis write at the same time as him? Am I right?
They did, yeah. I think they knew each other.
Yeah.
So maybe actually both of those, they were kind of the titans, weren't they? And you got
it's funny. Obviously, I was swept up by the Lord of the Rings fervour as much as everyone else, and I would spend every waking hour thinking about it, reading about it, collecting all the figures, having everything. I remember my dad was a big influence on me about that as well. He loved it.
Okay, yeah,
and I think that was a huge part of the reason. It was already sort of in my mind before the films,
right? Okay,
because he was such a big fan. But yeah, no, I struggle to think of anyone that's as much of a titan as him. Certainly in terms of Western, influence on the genre as a whole.
I mean, you look at the films as well. Similarly, very well adapted. I'm not talking about The Hobbit, by the way. I fucking don't like those at all. But the films since, even like the Narnia adaptations, and even to a certain extent, like something like Harry Potter, they're standing in the shadow of Lord of the Rings, and they, for good reason. It is just sort of cream of the crop. Interesting, because folklore. I said this before, but folklore. They're always like cautionary tales. So, as an example, like you got will-o'-the-wisp, which is basically like light that float around lakes and stuff. The idea is they draw in, like kind of almost like a siren, except it never took the form of what it would draw in like travellers and stuff, and they drown. And so that's kind of a cautionary tale. Yeah. And it's funny how all of a sudden, I don't know when this happened, it could have been sort of the 16th century or it could have been Tolkien, that cautionary side of it gave way to just world building.
Yeah, I think it is. I think you're partially right. I think we're sort of going against our earlier point, really, about how the popularity of fantasy is rooted in escapism, wholly rooted in escapism.
Yeah.
I do believe that is a huge part of it, but I also think it's the way in which people like Tolkien at the time was obviously he'd come back from the First World War. He'd seen the environmental destruction that humanity was capable of, and I think that obviously influenced a lot of the stuff he did. For stuff like Isengard, for example, when they're chopping down the Banghorn Forest and all this, so like
industrial,
the sort of remorseless destruction of this sort of industrialized world, which wasn't necessarily just him writing about that. I mean, people like Dickens was writing about that for a long time before Tolkien. But I guess it's someone that could embed those ideas into a fantasy work, and it sort of, as I said earlier, sort of undermines that point about it being pure escapism. But what I think about Lord of the Rings that works quite well is that it can be pure escapism. Yeah. Should you choose it to be. Whereas, I think you can sort of ignore those pretty sort of overt environmental messages. It's interesting as well, as Lord of the Rings has gone on, just staying with the themes of Lord of the Rings for a little bit. There's a lot of discourse about how troubling aspects of it is.
Yes, definitely.
In terms of the presentations of race and other things like that, which is, I think this will tie in quite nicely with our discussion about fandom, which we're going to talk about later. But that has been like a real really divided people, because obviously you get people that are like Tolkien purists, Lord of the Rings purists, who would die on a hill for that mythology, who steadfastly reject this notion that the book is, in some ways, it's portrayals of certain cultures through the guy. And, let's be honest, I mean, a lot of the more nefarious or evil contingents or armies in Lord of the Rings, they're not white Western cultures.
No,
are they?
they're not. No, and then you have kind of pristine elves, right?
Yeah.
The kind of the bourgeoisie of all,
Yeah.
but they're portrayed as being entirely almost godlike. As opposed to being the source of the problem. Which obviously, it's his world. He didn't spin it
I think
that
they're sort
way.
of pretend as arrogant to a fault, aren't they? The elves. But yeah, you're right in terms of that ethereal grace.
Yeah.
I just think it's a really interesting point to touch on. I mean, I don't know how I stand on the argument. I don't really know enough about the arguments that have been put forward, but I think it's really interesting that there's developed sort of discussion about this text that's so old. And you think about it's had this heyday with the films, and since then, obviously, the fervor's died down.
Yeah,
obviously, it's risen slightly with the Amazon show.
It's
just an interesting thing. In regards to films. I mean, when you think about a sort of fantasy, a watershed moment in terms of our lives,
I
can't think. I mean, the only things I can think of apart from that is like watching Labyrinth.
Okay, or
Jason and the Argonauts.
Yeah.
I mean, that for me is I've mentioned that before, but one of the big moments in my life as a kid, and being obsessed with that. Again, obviously the escapist element appealed to me a lot more then. As a sort of 7 or 8 year old. Yeah, this idea that they can create these worlds and these creatures and these sort of, obviously they're leaning heavily or exclusively on Greek mythology. But, But I mean, it's just this idea that they can realise that mythology. And it's sort of, I think my relationship with Lord of the Rings at that time in my life as a teenager was no different to my relationship with Jason and the Argonauts when I was 8 or 9 years old.
Okay.
And the idea that this is just this huge world, so much depth to it. And regardless of what you think of Tolkien, as a writer, I actually don't think Lord of the Rings is written that well, personally.
A lot of songs in it.
Yeah,
break into song.
Like I've been reading it through recently, just for the sake of like getting into just having a little go at it, and I just thought, God, this really isn't. I don't know. Just personally, I'm hoping I don't have
I
flaming copy of Lord of the Rings posted through my house, burn it down, but
smeared in shit.
Yeah.
No, I think The Two Towers is probably the best book.
It's also the best film in my opinion.
Oh really? I think Fellowship's the best, but I also think Fellowship's the worst book as well. I think it takes
Council of Elrond.
Yeah, fucking hell.
I remember reading that when I was like 15 and I was like, what the
Peter Jackson did an amazing job of adapting an almost unadaptable scene.
Brevity, right?
Yeah. Fucking hell. Tough read, that entire, what was it, like 6 chapters or something? I'm not sure. Maybe just even the one chapter.
It's ridiculous page count, that's all I remember.
Yeah, Lord of the Rings, for me, weirdly, my parents went to see it first, before I got a chance. 2001, I was a bit young for it.
Oh, yeah.
Because, I mean, the orcs are quite gruesome.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They're like
horribly designed, aren't
they? Really like smarmy, gnarly little creatures. And, they came back and they fucking hated it. They absolutely hate it. I remember distinctly them coming back from the cinema and saying it was just boring. And so that was my exposure to Lord of the Rings and Fellowship of the Ring. And then my friend Jim, right, he saw it and he's like, right, everyone, you have to come around mine. As soon as it comes out on video, day one, I'll go and get it and we'll watch Lord of the Rings. And we did, and I was like blown away. I was like, I couldn't believe that I was misled. I was like, that's incredible, and I'd love to get them to watch it again, because I just think there's something so brilliant about the way that story was told. And even down, like, if you strip it down to the basics, you've got the hobbits, which are, there's that line, isn't there, even the smallest person can change the course of the future, and that's such a universal message. I think that's really
it's quite trite, isn't it?
Completely,
but it's done well, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's such a wonderful scene at the end where the small people are making a big difference, and I think that is part of the reason why the escapism works so well, is because when you boil it down to its bare bones, the central message is so just like universal. Yeah. Despite what we were saying earlier about the historical context in which it was written, and the opinions and attitudes towards certain cultures did bleed into that a lot, and that is like a troubling thing. But on the flip side, it does have that universal kind of message, I think.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I can't speak to anyone that was involved in the creative process of Lord of the Rings, but the film, I mean. But or the films.
Yeah.
But I think they're adapting a source material and they're adapting it faithfully to a point. I mean, I know a lot of people in the Tolkien estate really didn't like the films.
Yeah.
And obviously they make lots of changes for the sake of taking this incredibly dense piece of work into like 3 separate movies. Granted, they're fucking long movies if you get the extended edition, but there's still so much to pack into.
Yeah. Watch them every year, I think.
I watch them
about once a year.
But I think I was going to sort of say you can enjoy them. I still feel, I think my relationship with Lord of the Rings has changed. I think it's dampened a little bit. I'm not as emphatic about them as I once was.
Okay.
I think I might have burnt myself out on them being like a teenager and sort of like, getting really, probably alarmingly too into it.
I mean, there's a lot to digest with them, but I guess even after you kind of digest the stuff like the military strategy that's in it, because there's a bit of that in the films, and then you can kind of there's fan theories about the Uruk-hai army and how those formations worked and stuff like that.
This is where I was when I was a teenager.
Yeah.
And I think you can enjoy that, and I still think yes, there are elements that I think are all part of the modern discourse. Obviously, the films were made before a lot of these discussions were happening. I'm sure these discussions were happening.
Yeah.
But perhaps not to the scale that they are now.
No,
and I think we have to accept that those things are going to happen, but enjoying it doesn't necessarily make you an enemy of the progress those discussions might bring to the table. It's strange that some people are so, I mean, you're allowed to have an opinion about it, but it's strange that some people are so vehemently like anti the idea of anything being remotely negative about it. Which I think is always really troubling. Generally.
It does. I mean, we'll talk about it a little bit more with the whole nerd culture thing, but it's odd how you're not. It's stubbornness just at the expense of potentially enjoying something or being with a critical eye.
Opening yourself up to a new idea or opinion, and
Interesting.
Yeah, interesting. But no, it is the watershed thing, isn't it? It is. I mean, Harry Potter, a lot of people would say that was also equally important. I was never a big Harry Potter fan. For some reason, in where I was with my friends at the time, it was like you were either Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings. For some reason, it was like a decision that someone made and everyone stuck to it. And, in my eyes, anyone worth their salt chose Lord of the Rings. But,
I was batting for the team Lord of the Rings, for sure.
Yeah.
I quietly enjoyed both, though. I
mean, you should be able to, obviously, but,
it was quietly.
When you're a teenager.
Oh, absolutely.
You've got to have strong opinions.
You have to side. You have to take a side, don't you? Yeah. Especially back in, 2001?
Exactly,
which is when Philosopher's Stone came out, so there you go.
Wow, I forgot this that early as well, isn't it?
I remember having the top trumps for both Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter.
Oh, to please any side of this partisan.
Just in case I.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I think Harry Potter perhaps is more escapism for a certain age group.
Yes.
Because
more kind of gender neutral in terms of being like friendly. I think Lord of the Rings is a bit more for the boys, a little bit. Okay. Or at least was when I was at school.
Do you know what? Thinking about it, maybe that is maybe more true in a sense of just what people assume the appeal of that was.
I'm definitely not saying that Lord of the Rings is for boys. It's not like Hannah absolutely loves Lord of the Rings, and I've it's just not true at all. But I think
boys only.
Boys only.
You can't enjoy this.
Get out
boys
watching
only.
Fellowship.
Yeah. Why are you not wearing any clothes?
Yeah. But I think definitely at the time it was something that was more kind of patriarchal. I don't really know why.
I think you might be onto something. But I think you're right as well with Harry Potter having a bit more of a broader appeal.
Yeah.
And having that escapism about, being a wizard.
Yeah. More child friendly,
That is inherently quite an escapist idea, isn't it? Being
Completely.
able to have
being thrust away from your kind of boring sepia-toned English life and getting kind of transported into this world of wonder where, and magic is real. Not only is magic real, you can do it, but only you and a select group of people. That is very, very escapist, actually. Yeah, completely. And it worked clearly.
I think it's on a par, isn't it? I'm not sure if it, in terms of the overall impact, they're on a par, but certainly in terms of more the way people engage with culture now, I would say they're on a par with each other, aren't they?
Completely, yeah. I think the difference with Harry Potter is it sort of snagged a couple of generations, right, when they were like 9, 10, 11 or 12,
Yeah.
and then you grew up with them. So like Prisoner of Azkaban, which is my favourite one, came out and it was a bit more grown up. Everyone was like, shit, okay, this is developing.
Yeah,
and then by the last one, it's quite, it's quite deals with some hefty subjects, not in any real depth, but like it does, that stuff's there. And they started getting sort of French cinematographers in to do all of the like the guy that shot Inside Llewyn Davis was
really?
involved with the 6th film. And they like took a stab with like Alfonso Cuarón, who was known for definitely at the time when he made Prisoner of Azkaban, he was known for making this sort of like coming of age road movie, which what was that, Whitey Mama Tambian. And he'd just done that, and they were like, we're getting this guy in for.
Yeah, that is a bizarre choice, isn't it?
Really strange, yeah.
Yeah, I'd not considered that.
But yeah, no, I think that's the difference with Lord of the Rings. Obviously, you had 3 films that were all shot at the same time, very clear beginning, middle, and end. But then Harry Potter was more like developed with generations.
Yeah, that is a point, but bizarrely I hadn't considered, given how obvious it is. But yeah, that's well put. Yeah, I think you could spend ages talking about those 2 films. So I'm going to take us away and talk about something else. So we sort of touched on it, the idea with fantasy being escapism, but also the duality of fantasy, and certainly in the case of Lord of the Rings, and probably if you mind hard enough Harry Potter, but I'm not going to because I'm not bothered. Sorry. The duality being that, obviously you can escape or you can wallow in the sort of thematic intention, both positive and negative.
Yeah.
The film I wanted to mention was Pan's Labyrinth.
Oh, yeah.
Because that's sort of the definitive example of someone using the sort of key elements of fantasy that are central to the escapism, rooting them in a period of history where I imagine for a lot of children wanting to escape was the desire to escape was higher than it probably usually would be.
Yeah.
But then fusing them together in a way that suggests the horror of both, the potential for horror within both. If I was just trying to think about like a standout fantasy moment post Lord of the Rings, still in my sort of teens, that'd be it.
Oh, completely, yeah. Pan's Labyrinth, fuck, that was one of the first films I remember watching with subtitles and thinking, I actually genuinely enjoyed that. It's embarrassing to say, but before then I used to kind of sneer at films with subtitles and think, they're sort of like high art that I'm not ever going to be able to understand. And then I watched Pan's Labyrinth, I was like, oh no, okay. Yeah. This is like...
Well, it's an entry point film, isn't it? I would consider that as a bit off piece, but that and City of God... Lahane.
Yeah.
They're the films that, like, I think that managed to break out from the sort of confines of
the World Cinema section in HMV, right?
Yeah, like World Cinema just being for a certain strata of people, or a certain type of person that's that way inclined.
Yeah, I'm so glad it happened as well, because like I was just restricting myself massively.
But it is, I still think his finest hour.
Del Toro.
Yeah, I don't think he's. I mean, I like some of his newer stuff, but not to the level of Pan's Labyrinth.
Devil's Backbone that was before Pan's Labyrinth. It isn't as good a film as Pan's Labyrinth, but it has the DNA of Pan's Labyrinth in it.
Yeah,
like it's set in the same
trauma of the Spanish Civil War, isn't it?
Yeah, completely. Like there's that unexploded bomb, and it's set in an orphanage as well, and it's always surrounding. Troubled children is quite often a key theme of a lot of fantasy. So like obviously kind of Harry Potter and also like Narnia as well. Evacuees, right?
Yeah,
so they're
escaping the horror of conflict.
Yeah.
Just I think that, and that's what I love so much about Pan's Labyrinth. I've not seen it for a long time, but the idea of that sort of the trauma, because it's a conflict that not a lot of people know a great deal about, and it's actually like a country ripping itself apart and exterior powers sort of throwing their oar in to sort of try and manipulate the sort of geopolitical situation. But it's really about trauma, this shared trauma in a nation, which is still felt in the country today. And I think the way, obviously I'm not Spanish, my knowledge of the war is by no means detailed, but what the film does so well is it really entrenches that trauma centrally. The idea of people from the same country killing each other over ideology, being ripped apart by ideology, and having, disastrous ramifications for all involved. And the idea that fantasy can only go so far. You can't, you can only take you so far, because she's like the queen, isn't she, of the
Ophelia.
The fantasy world, isn't she? And
it's so sweet, but also it doesn't shy away from more disturbing aspects of fantasy as well, like with the bloke with the eyes on his hands.
Amazing design,
so good. Yeah. And then like the sort of tasks it's 3 tasks, isn't it? She had to like kind of put herself through, and it's almost like it's not just escapism in the sort of Harry Potter wizarding world sense, right? It's also like a sort of therapy she's going through. I always thought, like she's kind of weirdly subjecting herself to sort of horrifying things that maybe to if she ever got there, to prepare herself for what is clearly a pretty nasty world, like you say, that's getting ripped apart. Yeah, interesting.
I guess it speaks to that idea of mythology again being central to the importance and I guess popularity of the fantasy genre, in the sense that it does feel deeply embedded in that the Spanish mythology and folklore. I mean, my knowledge of it's very limited again, but I just think that idea of anchoring in your history, in your culture, and I think that's a real sort of maybe more hidden sort of reason for its success. Yeah, not just Pan's Labyrinth, but the genre more broadly.
That's true, actually. Yeah, like I mean, I'm struggling to think of anything the sort of British equivalent at the moment, but I mean, England and Ireland and Scotland have got like really rich sort of folkloric history.
I guess that would be. I mean, go back to the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, that's probably it. I mean,
like all of the sort of Celtic language was lifted for Elvish, wasn't it? And,
yeah.
And I guess as well, if you look at the films, you can see that influence in the design choices in Lord of the Rings as well.
Oh,
like the armor and the weapons, particularly if you think about like Rohan, it's sort of very Saxon style. Sort of armor and weaponry. So obviously it's anchored in that period of history, and I think that gives you a deeper sense of connection to it.
Oh, completely.
And if you're looking inwards as well, there's something quite sort of from the outside. There's something appealing in that too, isn't there?
Yeah,
because particularly if you think from the American audience perspective, they sort of fetishize our sort of sort of Western European history, culture and mythology. So I guess there's like a more global appeal in that as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, just some kind of American production companies' casting choices. Quite often, the amount of sort of English actors that seem to break into Hollywood is like bizarre. Like, Christian Bale was Welsh, for example. I mean, and obviously Piers Brosnan as well. Is he Irish, I think? A lot of Irish actors, and a lot of maybe actors that kind of come from a country that has a lot of kind of Celtic background. Yeah, they end up making it quite big. And you're right, that is probably because of that sort of slight fetishization.
It's a hard word.
It is tiff. Yeah. It's tiff. Apparently the word tough is also really hard because I can't say that either. It's tiff. Tiff's a file format, excuse me. No, you're right, definitely. And I'm weirdly quite proud of the sort of folklore side of it. I think I always thought that was quite fascinating.
It is fascinating. We
don't pretend to be kind of remotely patriotic, but if I were to choose something to be patriotic about, it would probably be things like Stonehenge and stuff, like kind of rich history.
I agree.
Before colonialism sort of took over a little bit.
Absolutely. Moving on from that then, talking about the presence of Dungeons and Dragons as a film, as a fantasy movie, because there isn't really many of those about at the moment.
Not really, no.
In terms of a straight-laced fantasy experience, obviously I know there are lots of films that borrow elements of fantasy, and obviously you could argue that comic book films are pretty much fantasy films to some extent. But
even Star Wars. And
but for the sake of this discussion, straight-laced fantasy experiences are quite rare these days.
Yeah. And
I think a huge part of the reason for the presence of this film, I think, is the popularity of nerd culture.
Yes, yeah.
For example, Dungeons and Dragons. So really heavily popularised in contemporary culture for quite a while now. If you think about Stranger Things.
Yeah.
And there's an impact that has. I mean, that's like sort of like a minor aside. Obviously, it's sort of really important to the characterisation of that series.
Yeah.
Because it's rooted in a certain period of time where Dungeons and Dragons was obviously huge.
Yeah.
The impact that had on Dungeons and Dragons, for example, is pretty seismic. But it really took it away from what is the cliche sort of nerd. For a long time, the nerd was a deeply unpopular thing. If you were a nerd, you weren't popular.
No,
you're the kind of person that, in terms of a stereotype, would be destined to etch out the remainder of your existence in your mother's basement, surviving off Chicago town pizzas. Clogging up your sink, So that was the stereotype, wasn't it?
Man, absolutely. You have like your own microwave in your bedroom.
Yeah, that's smart thinking.
Yeah, I think so.
And you're all sallow, and your hair's sort of greasy and long, and
you're alone as well. I think
you're
that's
always
really
alone.
Key to it. It was always, there was never a group of those kinds of, stereotypically anyway, those kinds of folk.
A bit of a loner, And what I guess this sort of exposure to things that are considered nerdy into the mainstream, what that does is I think it makes it palatable.
Yeah.
Because we're sort of going through this thing where it's cool to be a nerd. Like, if you think about the impact that Marvel has had on comic books. Like,
oh my God, yeah.
If you were like in your 20s, 30s and had comic books, you were a fucking virgin.
Yeah.
As far as the society was concerned.
Absolutely,
You might as well chopped your knob off or wore barbed wire pants because no one was going near you.
No, yeah.
But now you go to most average Joe's house and they've fucking got comic book art on the wall.
Yeah.
Or reams of comic books. It's almost like a
strange,
point of pride that they have these things. And and same with even like video games. I mean, video games for a long time, it wasn't cool to be that into video games.
No,
Obviously, that's changed now as they become progressively more mainstream. But I think that, there is something interesting in that, and I think things like Stranger Things, to bring it back to Dungeons and Dragons, have made it a hugely popular thing, and so many people I know play it, like people I just wouldn't expect, again because my brain defaults to these completely, I know, redundant stereotypes.
I mean, it's just how you were brought up, right? At school, I remember being massively into...
one of them.
Covertly, I was like massively into, remember like Elder Scrolls, like Oblivion? Fuck it, I sank so many hours into that video game. But I didn't talk about it.
I mean,
I kept it to myself, man. There was like one or two mates who would be like, I completed that quest last night.
Yeah.
But it was one or two, and it would be covert. You would not broadcast that.
I mean, I was, loved, like, I was all into the models and all that.
Yeah, man.
In fact, the reason I stopped doing it at school, because we used to do, this is sort of an aside again, but we had like a model club at school, and there was a teacher who was really enthusiastic about it. And then one time we did it in the maths room, and there was this maths teacher who I always thought was fucking lame.
Yeah.
Retrospectively, I think he's actually all right now.
Yeah.
He was like a new teacher in his early 20s, getting fucking ripped by loads of like 14, 15-year-olds. So if you hear this, Mr. Tiernan, I don't, but at the time I thought you were a knob. So for the sake of this, he was laughing at us.
Oh, man.
And you think, fucking hell, if a maths teacher thinks I'm lame, I don't stand a chance.
That just speaks so much to how like society has changed in the last 20 years, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You would not get away with that now.
No.
Like, no way.
No.
Not a chance in hell.
And you probably wouldn't get laughed at because it's like cool to be a nerd now.
Yeah,
it's interesting.
It's bizarre.
It's interesting, specifically within the context of Dungeons and Dragons as well, because in the sort of 70s and certainly the 80s, it was part of that sort of video nasties culture, or that sort of, or satanic, more satanic. If you were into like metal music and Dungeons and Dragons, which were often considered sort of synonymous with one another,
right? Yeah.
You were like a devil worshipper.
Wow,
it was really it was like it was almost like a countercultural thing to do.
Okay,
or viewed as by the sort of the dominant, because there was that big witch hunt craze.
Yes, yeah,
and that was a big part of it. Or the sort of obsessed with like people that are into satanic practice or whatever.
I mean, both have their roots in folklore, though.
Yeah,
so weirdly, it does kind of make sense. That
comes round in circles. You see, it's not just the mindless jabbering of two sweaty losers.
Yeah, no.
There's a plan.
Got a microwave there.
Yeah, full to the brim of Chicago town.
Yeah, God, those pieces.
And now it's like I said, everyone's doing it.
It's flourished. Yeah, I mean, actually, it was funny. At work, I mentioned that I was going to go see the Dungeons & Dragons film, and I immediately had to say afterwards, I'm not massively into the tabletop game. But I would then, after saying that, I was like, oh shit, some people, because I said it in quite a sort of, just kind of deep-seated, I said it in a slightly sort of derogatory way. I didn't mean anything ill by it, but I did think afterwards, I was like, ooh, there might have been a fair few people in that room who were massively into Dungeons & Dragons.
Yeah.
And now, of course, like I'm living in a time in which that's completely acceptable, as it should be.
Yeah, of course.
Have I just been like, have I just insulted someone? You know what I mean?
Ragging on it.
Strange.
Yeah, I mean, nerd culture is in, man. I mean, it's been in for a long time, but I think the application of fan culture is essential, or one of the strings to Hollywood's bow now.
Yes.
You know, like in terms of, we talk about this a lot, the idea of nostalgia, or giving audiences what they want, essentially, either through nostalgia or through like responding to their sort of like vigorous campaigning, which is a huge part of this interaction now that the industry has with its consumer. They hold a huge amount of power in terms of how films are released, the storylines of, you know, what of these films, which films don't get released, or you know, and I just think that's too much.
Yeah, I mean, I've just kind of, off the top of my head, I'm thinking specifically about Zack Snyder's Justice League.
Yeah, yeah.
And that got made because it was demanded by fans, and fans alone. I mean, obviously the film was shot, but there's an extra 70 million Warner Brothers had to spend on something they knew wasn't going to be releasable in cinemas because it was a pandemic. They spent 70 million basically giving it a new lick of paint and re-editing it.
It was better for it.
Yeah,
ironically
completely.
enough.
Yeah. It's good. The reception was by and large warmer. I think the consensus was that it still had a lot of issues.
Yeah,
but it was more tonally focused. Apparently, I've not seen it.
Yeah, I have seen it.
Okay.
I mean, because I always had a bizarre soft spot for Snyder's DC films, even though they're sort of hopelessly juvenile. They do this sort of annoying thing where they think because they've got a darker colour palette and a bit of blood in it that everyone thinks it's really adult and mature. Which I think is something DC do too much anyway. With their films, but it just comes across like a sort of like a teenager's approximation of what those themes and ideas should be.
Okay,
And I'm not saying that I dislike Snyder for that necessarily. Like, I actually like the first like half of Man of Steel. I quite liked. The elements of Batman vs Superman I begrudgingly enjoyed.
Oh, really?
Even the original cut of the Justice League, which even though it was crap, really, and I don't really say that about a lot of movies, but it really wasn't good. There were elements of that I quite liked, so I can understand why there are these sort of crumbs in which fans can hold on to. But and I didn't mind the Snyder cut of Justice League when it came out. I thought this is actually all right.
Okay,
but the fact of the matter is that right that they should pander to that. I think there's something troubling about that. I mean, you could argue with the whole the reason why Snyder, because he had to obviously leave the project after a personal tragedy, the death of his daughter, which is obviously hideous for him to deal with, and obviously that would have impacted the film a great deal. But we just don't know how much it impacted sort of Warner Brothers' strategy with the movie and bringing in someone else to finish it. It was Joss Whedon, wasn't it?
Joss Whedon, yeah.
Oh, fuck me. So, but I just think if you take that away and just think about the audience response and engagement and the sort of, I just think there's something inherently troubling about that.
I think so.
I just don't think that they should be able to have that power. I know you could say, well, they're the ones that are buying the ticket, but it's like part of the brilliance of engaging with any film is
waiting for a surprise.
Like sort of relying on the people that are making it to make it, and understanding that sometimes in life you're going to be disappointed. And that's just the way it works.
Completely,
Particularly when it comes to mainstream big films like that.
It's the start of a kind of melding together of like audiences and professional filmmakers. Right, that's already happening. There's a kind of the lines are getting blurred in that respect. And that in a lot of ways can be quite good. Like, you have a lot of films that cost next to nothing, getting a lot more attention than they ever would before, like the age of the internet and stuff like that. But then when the demands are coming from people who don't work in that industry, haven't got any idea how difficult it is to enact those sort of changes, the film isn't going to be for everyone anymore. It's going to be for...
It never can be.
No
film can ever can be.
No.
Even the film that's got the broadest appeal is going to rub someone up the wrong way.
Yeah, completely.
And I just think... And everyone has their own individual... It's like we joked about this about Star Wars. You said that thing that the biggest Star Wars fan you know doesn't like Star Wars.
Yeah.
Like, it's that thing, like, everyone has their own view of what these things should be. When you think about comic books or sci-fi or even fantasy, there are so many different ways of interpreting a text or a body of work that the film is being made from.
Yeah.
So the idea that your version is more important than anyone else's is ridiculous.
Oh, completely, yeah.
And the idea that should be more important than the vision of the creatives who have been have been paid to make the movie.
Yeah.
Who've invested a significant amount of time into that movie. And of course it doesn't always work. I mean, Snyder's films didn't necessarily work on a sort of universal way. Otherwise, he'd still be making those movies. He'd still be spearheading DC into its new dawn.
Yeah.
But the reality is it didn't work out. And of course there are lots of people that thought it should have worked out. But they shouldn't be allowed to say, well, actually, no, this should. Because they're even doing this thing now, like James Gunn is now helming DC, isn't he?
He is, yeah.
And he's getting a lot of flack from like Snyderverse fans. They're basically just going to make it their mission to like discredit every one of the films that comes out. And I just think, well, those films may well be shit.
Yeah.
You don't know.
No.
But you shouldn't be doing that because you're bitter about not getting the version of the characters or the world that you want.
Yeah.
I think that's really weird.
It is odd, and I mean, you have your Snyderverse, right? There's there's what, 4 or 5?
There's a few films there.
A few films, just go and watch those again.
Yeah.
If you're that if you're that kind of closed-minded and not open to a new filmmaker trying something different, which I think should constantly happen, right? I think you should be like a prime minister almost. You should have it for 4 years and then get someone new in, and that would be really interesting and fresh and new, and that the world would be a better place for it. The cinematic world, anyway. But yeah, the loyalty almost hinges on cult-like behaviour of being... And I get it, people like to feel part of a collective, but it's got to a point now where you can get some really nasty people who have the advantage of being anonymous, right? Because it's the vast majority of this is things like you get it via Twitter and you
Reddit
get all that kind of stuff. It's never really face to face. I've never seen a fist fight about like kind of Snyderverse fans kicking the shit out of like someone who quite liked the Suicide Squad. So they have the advantage of being anonymous, and that can bring out the worst in people. And there's almost a kind of incel-y like thing about certain diehards, like sort of Snyder fans, I find quite troubling.
Yeah, I mean, to sort of bring it back to fantasy a little bit for me, I think part of the reason why I've sort of fallen out of love with Lord of the Rings in general is because I probably would have been those people.
Right.
If the internet was like that, I was so obsessed with it and so into it that like if they made something that didn't correspond with how I perceived the world and the characters, and I think about that, and it's sort of to be that into something which is not real.
Yeah.
I mean, don't be wrong, I adore cinema for many reasons, but one of the reasons is escapism, right?
Completely.
Of course. So it's not that I'm averse to that, but I think it's troubling when it consumes you. Just thinking about that now, with the Hobbit films came out, and we were all, Lord of the Rings fans, diehard Lord of the Rings fans, or
completely.
Or people that were diehard Lord of the Rings fans obviously have still have a reverence for that world, and they were largely dreadful.
Yeah.
What was my response to that? I mean, that was crap, and that was it.
Yeah.
I mean, what else can you do? There are lots of reasons why those films didn't work. A lot of industry reasons.
Yeah.
A lot of issues, obviously, with New Zealand and Del Toro dropping out. And
Jackson didn't have enough time to prep.
And even he admitted he didn't have a clue what he was doing, which is always a sort of ominous
But
thing.
also, I think perhaps Warner Brothers, they weren't involved with Lord of the Rings. It was New Line, but it was a Warner Brothers New Line co-production. Yeah. So I think they might have listened to a few too many fans,
maybe,
who wanted different things, and they tried to pack it tight. The fact it was one book as well, like they packed it with all this content, which included like a weird love triangle and a lot of stuff, which was in the appendices, but. Was it really? I do think that part of the reason why those films didn't work was actually because of the fact that there was a fan base who, and I can say the same, like quite a fiercely loyal fan base who were expecting so much.
Yeah.
And when their expectation is so high, you're
never going to deliver.
No, there's never going to be one person calling the shots. It's going to be a group of like studio execs all making different choices at different times, and it's just a bit too scattershot. Anyway, that's enough about The Hobbit. I could go on about The Hobbit for a long time.
Not great, but I mean, I think the point is that we both didn't like The Hobbit, but we didn't take to Reddit to demand that they made a new cut. Or
no, God.
Maybe we did. Maybe we're just so embarrassed to admit that we did. We didn't.
No, my initial reaction was to say that they were good. Actually,
okay.
I pretended to like them for a while, and then eventually kind of thought, I'm a bit older now. I can say.
Well, if you ever see any scathing reviews from Bilbo_42069.
Yeah.
Wasn't he?
Wasn't you?
No,
Yeah,
wasn't
no.
No, I just think it's a real strange thing. I mean, of course, like nerd culture, as we keep calling it, or fandom, you know, it can be a wonderful thing. You know, people can have a community over a shared love of something, and that can create wonderful experiences for people. And I think it's important to remember that
Completely. Yeah.
but it's hard not to sort of only see the negativity of it in the current landscape of things. I mean, the way people fucking moaned about Star Wars, it's just like, fucking hell, like, it's fucking Star Wars, you know what I mean? I mean, it might be because I've never had a huge amount of reverence for Star Wars. Obviously, the original 3 are huge moments. Everyone, you know, worth their salt acknowledges that, at least in terms of their impact on cinema.
Yeah.
But I'm not a huge Star Wars fan, so maybe this might sound like I'm being a bit dispassionate about it. But I just think, just get a grip.
Yeah.
Like, there's no other way I can say it. Get a fucking grip. Like,
Go
you
in.
didn't like it.
Yeah.
Go home, and maybe you can, like, you know, there's so much source material there. You can just, if you want to retreat to that source material, it's there for you to.
Exactly.
So you don't, you know, I don't know. It's about control, isn't it, fundamentally? And everyone just wants to control things that they love. And some people are prepared to do that to the point where everyone else loses out.
Yeah.
Including the mental health of people that are involved in these things.
Oh my God,
It's just like, that's when you just have to get a grip. But there's no other way I can say it apart from that, really.
Yeah, because, you know, I think it's easy to forget that people that make this stuff make it because they love it.
Yeah.
They love acting, they love directing, they love production design, right?
Yeah.
And you've got these kind of people who, you know, they might be getting paid a pretty penny, but they love it. If the result of that work, that really hard work they put in, is met with nothing but like vitriol, what's that going to do to somebody? You've got to really have to think carefully about that. You can criticize and you can say, oh, maybe this you could have done that differently, perhaps. But it's the kind of cruelness that it's enacted that is the real problem.
I think every filmmaker, I mean, I'd like to think would I mean, if I was a filmmaker, a successful one, I'd like to think that making films for mass audiences is a privilege.
Yeah.
So that should always trump the feelings you have about people being negative about what you've made.
Yeah.
But obviously you're human, and you're obviously going to get frustrated because, you know, you've poured your heart and soul into something just for someone to sit on a sofa that's never worked in the industry to say it's shit without being able to expand on it. That must hurt. I'm not saying that you're not, but I think there has to be a degree of accepting that some people aren't just going to like what you've made.
Yeah, completely.
And you have to accept that. But you're absolutely right that when there's a line.
Yeah.
You can say something shit and list why, and that's fine. But if you start going after people and start drumming up this sort of like this sort of toxic online amorphous mass of sort of twattery, and then just sort of setting them loose on people because they didn't have the right colour lightsaber, or why is it a girl? You know, it's like, I don't know what, you know, like, it's just the worst.
They've assumed a set of rules that were never put in place with Star Wars. You know what I mean? Like, why can't, like, it doesn't matter. Like, the whole thing about this is a massive, big collection of galaxies with all sorts of different stuff going on. That's like the appeal. That's where the escapism should come from. It shouldn't be you saying, oh, but you didn't like this in the last one. Or back in the 70s, back in the glory days when it was all different. And it just never... It's horrendous, and it's a real shame.
It tars the legacy of the property as well. You think about Rick and Morty.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone fucking loved Rick and Morty. You couldn't go, like... You know, you couldn't have 5 separate conversations with different people and Rick and Morty not come up.
Yeah.
But then the fans took hold and poisoned it.
Yeah.
And it's given it a bad smell. You know, and that's not the fault of the creators at all. But so I don't think these people realise how much damage it can do. Maybe that's what they want, because they want it to have it for themselves. I don't know. But
maybe.
I just think that's when they're going to, like, takeaway shops and demanding Szechuan sauce and, like, having paddies on the floor, like mock paddies about it and stuff. I just think, fucking hell, like...
How deep into this are you?
Yeah, like, wow, that's...
Just quickly as well, I just think like final season of Game of Thrones. I never really got into Game of Thrones. Did you watch it?
I am notoriously dreadful with TV shows. Funnily enough, my partner Georgia, she just got through it.
Oh, right.
And I sort of would watch half-heartedly every now and again when I'm, like, doing something else or whatever. But I mean, the last season is crap. I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, if you think about all that world building, which is essential to Game of Thrones, and the idea of this sort of, like, adult fantasy, you know, because it's and I think in some ways they did achieve that quite well thematically, but I think visually they'd have like scenes with prostitutes and stuff, and it's just like, this is just unnecessary. You're just doing that thing that people go, God, this is adult. It's fantasy. It's like Lord of the Rings, but there's hookers walking around with it. That's really adult. That's a weird thing that they do, and I found that a bit overbearing. That's not even the question. I just started talking about that. I don't know why.
No, it's fine.
Answering your question, sorry. But yeah, the final season is just rushed, and you can tell the two creators clearly had their eyes on other projects and wanted to sack it off. Like, you can clearly tell that just from the way they rush these character arcs that, by and large, have been quite well developed. I only got to season 3, is the answer to the question.
Okay,
and I stopped because it's to contradict that slightly. Again, to quote my friend Jan, he said it was like a sort of like a medieval version of EastEnders, and I thought that was when he said that, because I was starting to feel this sort of feeling of about it. I'm just bored now, and that was why.
Okay,
but for a lot of people that wasn't the case. But carry on. That was a really
no. You kind of answered everything
ridiculously.
I just wanted to get your take on it.
Focused ramble.
It's fine. And I think the same thing happened as like you were saying about Rick and Morty. It's just like the attitude towards the 8th season was like quite nasty for a long time. There were people really with quite a lot of spite in their voices, voicing their displeasure for the 8th final season of Game of Thrones. And I did just think, like you said, the actual reason was like they were sick of it. There's 8 fucking seasons of it, and they hadn't got the source material.
George R. R. Martin writes about a page of fucking decade by the looks of things.
So
what's he doing? Get that stupid hat off and just do some writing. Do you know what I mean? Like, it can't be that hard.
I mean, you've done it before.
And
clearly.
Again, the Game of Thrones books, not that well written, I didn't think. I read the first 2 and was like,
I never bothered.
I mean, again, I'm not a literary critic by any stretch of the imagination, but I just thought, I think, come on, mate, pull your finger out.
Bizarre, interesting, but also equally, met with a lot of really intense criticism. And I've like you, never watched it with any kind of real interest. But I can understand its appeal for sure. Yeah.
To bring it back to Dungeons and Dragons.
Yes, we keep going off on
we do.
Tangents. There you go.
But like what I quite liked about the film. Let's talk about the film now.
Let's do it. Yeah.
Was that it didn't feel like it was placating any of that horrible fan shit.
No,
it felt sort of quite earnest and sincere.
Yes,
and made with, I guess, as much creative control as you can get when you're making a blockbuster movie. Yeah, in terms of like embedding your sensibilities as filmmakers, because both directors. Game Night, right? They directed Game Night,
which is really good.
Yeah, which was a real surprise for me. I could sort of be a bit lukewarm to a lot of American comedies for some reason, but it really took me by surprise. Game Night, and I really enjoyed it. So when I knew these guys were directing it, I thought, well, obviously it's going to have those sensibilities. Yeah, and they do a pretty good job of it, don't they? Really,
they do. Yeah, I mean, it starts with casting for me. I thought it was really well cast. They didn't get like A+ list actors, right? I mean, would you say Chris Pine is pretty big, but he's not like put his poster on your wall kind of big.
No,
would you say? No. So that was a smart choice, I think. So they didn't come with any baggage. No, it was a really good start, and they were charismatic, and they're quite humble by and large. I've listened to a few interviews with them, and they seem just happy to be working. Yeah, which is really refreshing. So they've got that. They've got a really solid cast there. Yeah, they just approached it with a real kind of real simplicity, which allowed me to enjoy it despite the fact I've never played the game.
No, same, never.
And I think that's the general kind of attitude. Like a lot of people I've spoken to actually haven't seen it. Weirdly, I hope it's doing well because it deserves to do well.
It's chugging along nicely. I think they were speculating that it wasn't going to do as well as they perhaps would hope.
Okay,
but they said it was doing fine.
So it's got legs. That's nice.
I think maybe the marketing of it's not been great, and the fact that it sort of just came out of nowhere. Because when we were trying to think of a film to do this week, we were like, Dungeons and Dragons. That's weird. I didn't even fucking know much about it. So I think that might be down to that maybe, and maybe the appetite for that kind of fantasy isn't as strong as it once was. I don't know.
No, I also remember distinctly thinking the trailer wasn't very good.
No,
I remember
it wasn't
thinking
great.
it suffered from that same kind of Ant-Man-y type humour thing.
Yeah.
What did you call it? False irony.
Yeah,
which
yeah.
is in that Shazam trailer, which played just before Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah,
as well.
yeah.
That bit where he's like, I just threw a dragon at I love my life. You know that.
Yeah, yeah. Or he's like when they rip off the Simpsons joke with the guy that's talking to someone on the sofa, and he's like, I'm a paediatrician. It's just like a watered down, shitty version of the Simpsons joke with the furniture salesman.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, dreadful trailer, fucking dreadful. I mean, that film looked fucking wank. Again, we just talked about not make. There's probably people involved with that film who poured their heart and soul into it.
Into the trailer.
But I mean, that trailer was horrendous.
Good. Yeah.
So you're right, actually. Like, I think a bad trailer can put a lot of people off.
But actually, I was surprised to see, because the trailer was filled with computer-generated imagery, right? And I was like, oh, God, here we go. I remember you saying at the end of the last podcast, I'm quite keen to watch something after this one that doesn't have any CG in it. CG heavy, but some real locations in there. Some really palpable... I think it was shot in... A lot of it was shot in around Ireland.
It's the sort of fantasy go-to, isn't
completely,
it?
Completely, Ireland or New Zealand.
Yeah, for the right reasons, right?
Yeah. I think, there's a studio in Belfast which can... there's a lot of... it's not the biggest country in the world, so you can travel to a lot of different interesting locations. So a lot of real tangible sets, which is really refreshing, harking back a little bit to Lord of the Rings. Tonally, it's not Lord of the Rings at all. Completely different sense of humour, completely different just attitude towards fantasy. But in terms of locations and also pyrotechnics, surprising amount of real explosions in this film. Quite liked that. Don't know why, I just remember thinking that you don't see that a lot now. Like Avatar had so much like shitty CGI fire in it. I always have my little visual effects sort of segment.
I like it.
Really impressive actually. I thought
it's funny because I think you're sort of conditioned to be vaguely cynical about any major blockbuster release, especially if it's a new property, because you just think it's probably going to have to play ball against the big boys. It's going to have to sort of play by their rules, which will probably make it either a cheap imitator or just shit by the basis that the tropes that they're trying to satisfy have been just done to death. And what I quite liked about, whilst it's obviously a blockbuster movie, it's obviously using like comedy, it leans on comedy quite a lot to mixed results. It's not as consistently funny as it probably wants to be. But when the jokes do land, I was surprised how funny I found the film. And I was surprised how much I enjoyed the film on the basis that it was just earnest, straight-laced fun. It wasn't tied down by sort of fandom or any of that twattery. It didn't feel like it was constantly marketing itself or marketing aspects of itself to me, like Marvel always does.
Or like, it wasn't thinking ahead, was it? It
No.
wasn't like the sequel.
I mean, apparently the directors have got ideas for a sequel they really want to chase. They've not even thought about it. So it just feels sort of like a bit more unshackled, and when that happened, it just felt like a more sincere blockbuster experience. And it wasn't the kind of blockbuster experience that will stay with me forever. Nor was it a film that didn't have problems. I thought it was far too bogged down with exposition. It raced around a bit too much, but fundamentally, I don't think that's what the film is concerned about. It's not concerned about world building too much to an extent. That really,
no, I know.
A lot of the exposition was more character focused. Which were kind of tropes you're more than familiar with if you've been going to the cinema for the last few years. But overall, so I just wanted to say I was pleasantly surprised. I think we both were. We came out of the cinema and we sort of said in our intro that we don't really have a lot to say, and that isn't negative. It's just, how much can you say other than this is just a fairly well put together, well acted, fairly well written slice of blockbuster fodder that is actually quite enjoyable.
Completely. A very satisfactory little watch. And if you're on the hunt for a bit of escapism, look no further at the moment. Anyway, really, if John Wick's a little bit too heavy for you, Dungeons and Dragons is out. It's bizarre for me to say those two things in like any kind of recommendation sort of way, because it's usually those. Dungeons and Dragons is the thing being not forced on me at all, but a lot of people try and get me to play it. Like I know a few people that's like, oh, you should give it a go, and I think you might have said the same at some point. Like, but I'm kind of I don't think it's not really encouraged me to explore the tabletop thing any more than I was curious about it before, but that wasn't his intention. And again, like you were saying before, that's a really good thing. It wasn't even trying to market the game.
No,
it was like this is our own property. That Paramount had it since 2007, I think.
Who had it before? Because was that film made in 2000?
Yeah. Courtney Solomon, who got it for. This is quite an interesting story, actually.
I had a feeling you'd know something about it. Go for it.
So, as far as I'm aware, this is what happened. He was so up for making a Dungeons and Dragons movie that he pretended to be like a student and called up the people that owned the rights, which was the people that had like made the game, or at least were in charge.
Coast?
That's right. Yeah. Got in with them, pretending to be like a student researching for something, and then one day just admitted, the only reason I knocked on your door was because I want the rights to make a film, and they let him.
Wow.
Yeah. So insane. Like,
did he direct it?
He ended up directing it, and his intention never was to direct it. He was going to find. James Cameron was involved at one point. I'm not joking. Yeah. Okay. But I think like, a lot of things didn't go so well, and he ended up doing it himself. He was quite young as well. He was like pretty, like I think he's like 22 or something.
Oh, really?
He directed it. Yeah, directed Jeremy Irons at 22.
That must be a daunting prospect. Yeah,
it's such a strange story. But anyway, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, oh god, I mean, the last time I saw this film was when I was probably about 10 or 11.
Right. Yeah.
I remember thinking even then it was not very good.
Yeah.
Marlon Wayans is in it.
Yes.
That's the thing that really stands out for me. Yeah.
Marlon Wayans from Requiem for a Dream.
Yes.
No less.
Yeah, and Scary Movie.
Yeah.
I think he was there for that kind of, because of that, that sort of sense of humour that he had. Yeah. I don't remember a lot more than that. Marlon Wayans wearing a stupid hat.
Yeah.
That's all I can remember.
But, a lot of polystyrene looking sets and things.
Yeah.
It's like dodgy green screen. No, odd story about the rights that kind of eventually came back to Paramount.
Okay, and then of course,
then this happened. Yeah. Which
jumped forward a few years, and
indeed,
here we are.
Yeah. Like Michelle Rodriguez as well in it. I actually thought, just as a quick aside, like her character, she plays the stereotypical kind of tough girl, right?
Yeah.
That kind of tough, no nonsense. I don't know what the right word is to describe that.
Brawler?
Kind of, yeah, that's right.
Does that sort of play into the archetypes of Dungeons and Dragons? I think you have different characters for different things, don't you? That all have different...
Yeah, like abilities that you can play.
Yeah, like a brawler, or a fighter, or a thief.
Yeah.
Those kind of,
So I was expecting that performance again from her, because that's what we always get.
Yeah.
Actually thought she was a lot more likeable than a lot of her previous roles. I was like, she's like, I'm getting on with... Oh, it's Olga, isn't it?
Yeah.
But she's got like a real arc, and she's got, that whole thing about her taking care of the child was like really unexpected. I'm like, this is kind of Michelle Rodriguez, who's usually like typecast as a sort of like the brawler. It's odd, but like, I was just really surprised by the way her kind of character developed. For a blockbuster as big as this, $150 million film, I was like, oh, that's actually smart casting, and throwing something else at me there. Good stuff.
Yeah. Again, I've just sort of. Hugh Grant.
Oh yeah,
he was quite fun in it, I guess.
He was, yeah. I liked him, and I don't like him in a lot of stuff actually.
Oh really? You're not a big.
I have a problem with posh British actors.
Fair enough.
Colin
Farrell.
Colin
Farrell.
I was about to say Colin Farrell. Yeah. I love
Firth.
Colin Farrell. Yeah, Colin Firth annoys me. Hugh Grant annoys me. Hugh Laurie annoys me sometimes.
They do have this tendency to be put in films that only tend to be the kind of films for like upper middle class people. Like The King's Speech is it's a Daily Mail reader's paradise, isn't it?
Yeah.
You just think, fucking hell, this film's annoying. You're annoying. So I can understand.
And everyone else around you is saying it's amazing.
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah.
I don't know. But yeah, he surprised me in this. I thought he was a little bit too kind of annoyingly British at points. Like there's a bit where he talks about tea, and I'm like, oh god, stop it! It's not funny. I don't care. I know.
Maybe that joke landed in America.
It probably did. It probably brought the house down.
Yeah.
Focus groups were like clapping.
yeah.
But apart from that, yeah, he was good. I liked him in the role that he played. As that
He's
kind
sort of had a sort of change, isn't he? He's going for those roles a little bit more now, like Paddington 2. I actually haven't seen Paddington 2, but I know a lot of people got quite excited about his performance. Not much more I can say about it other than earnest fun.
Yes, definitely.
And in a cynical world, sometimes that's quite nice.
Great stuff.
Questing the cinematic void.
There we have it then. Another week, another ramble.
Yes.
Lofty, incisive,
rewarding,
arousing, rewarding.
Yeah.
Interesting to talk about that.
Yeah.
A real surprise again, I have to say it. I really didn't expect. I really expected to come out and be like, right, we've got another podcast about just us two saying how shit something is, and it was quite nice to not do that.
I thought so. Yeah. Good to just sort of be
positive.
And talk about fantasy films, which I haven't actually seen that many of them.
No, I was thinking that actually in prep for the episode, and trying to like find films, but I just it's quite hard.
Yeah, few and far between. I mean, they're around, but I just never. I'm a bit of it can never get better than Lord of the Rings type person.
Conan the Barbarian.
Yeah, that's true.
Just come to my head. We should talk about that. Right, let's do that.
Yeah. Another hour and a half. Brace yourselves.
Conan the Barbarian.
Yeah.
So, moving on then. Always looking onwards. Propulsive Cinebois. We're going to move away.
Yeah.
From blockbuster cinema.
Yeah.
We've camped within blockbusters for quite a while now. I'm sort of getting a bit fatigued with it. I don't know about you, as much as I, not to sound pompous, but
no.
I love obviously the bang bang sort of films.
Yeah.
It's nice to sort of go back to something a little bit more focused.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So with that in mind, we're going to be covering The Beasts.
Yes.
A work from Spanish director Rodrigo Sorogoyen. Oh, sorry, pal.
He's going to be gutted, mate.
Yeah, he's going to hear this and think, you bastards. Bet you voted to leave as well, didn't you? It's a film that I caught the trailer of. I was in the Watershed, one of our local cinemas, a couple of weeks ago, watching The Five Devils, which is very good.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I think it's coming on to Mubi.
Nice. Yeah.
So check it out if you haven't seen that. Very good. But this trailer came out and immediately gripped me.
Yeah.
It seems to be about a French couple farming in rural Spain.
Yeah.
And their practices and approaches to farming rub up the wrong way with the locals, who already have like this almost sort of xenophobic attitudes.
Okay. So
and it creates tension and hostilities as a result.
Sounds a little bit like the British sitcom The Good Life mixed with Straw Dogs.
It's funny actually, I was thinking Straw Dogs. That might be something to talk about.
I think so, yeah.
The idea about this sort of quiet horror in rural areas, and all it needs is some disagreement or something, and it just bursts.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a lot more dog eat dog, I guess, or at least it's portrayed that way in a lot of
So
a lot of films.
Interesting. I know very little about the director. Apparently, he's hailed as someone that's very good at suspense films. I've not seen any of his previous work.
Yeah.
We'll try to catch to the work if we can.
Yeah.
If not, I think it looks to be a film with lots of potential talking points and lots of opportunities to talk about films of a similar ilk, which I guess we'll only know after we've seen the film. We still have the Blokesploitation podcast in mind.
Yes.
Really keen for that one, but I think I might need a bit of research. I was thinking I need to watch Rise of the Foot Soldier again for some reason. But that's coming soon as well.
Perfect.
But in the meantime, our first foreign film, thinking about
it is. Yeah.
We're such cultural bottom feeders.
Oh my god, unbelievable.
So many opportunities, and we're like, Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania.
Oh, such hacks. Right, yeah. Anyway, in the meantime, I hope you enjoyed this episode.
Yeah.
Thank you for your continued support, and we'll be in your ears for the next one.
Yeah, see you then.
Bye.
Bye.